just as everybody's finding their way in, welcome. My name's Christina, and I'm the Director of Agile Learning here at ICAgile. And we're really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. So for those of you not familiar with us, ICAgile is a leading global accreditation and certification body in the business agility learning space. Our mission is to advance the state of Agile learning worldwide. And I think this discussion is going to really tip us into this evolution of Agile and where we're going next. So super excited to be here with two of the authors of the Agile2, the next iteration of Agile book. And I want to do a couple quick little housekeeping before we dive into it. For those of you that are here with us today, if you've got a question, please use that Q&A feature. We've got a wonderful team of moderators and behind the scenes helping answer your questions. And I'll be pulling from that to help guide the discussion today. So if there's something you really want to know, get that question in early so we've got time to address it with the panelists. If you're seeing our ICAgile support crew, make sure you click in that top right-hand corner of anybody's picture in the 3 dots and hide non-video participants so that you can just focus on our lovely panelists here today. And with that, I want to turn it over to you all to just do a real quick introduction. Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure.
Lisa,
well,
how about you start? Yeah, go for it.
Go first. My name is Lisa Cooney. I'm an Agile coach at a small company called Axios, which is a news media operation, and I support the product and tech side. I first learned about Agile about 7 or 8 years ago when I was working on an instructional design effort for the Department of Veterans Affairs. They wanted all their folks in IT to learn about Agile. And I was working with a team of people on courses to help them learn it. And I kind of fell in love, I guess is the only way to describe it, and decided after reading everything I could get my hands on that I wanted to get into that space somehow, and started working on learning and certifications and knowledge. And it's been a wonderful journey, and I'm really happy to be here today.
Great, thanks, Lisa.
Okay. Well, I thought Ahmed was going to go first because Ahmed is our distinguished host, but I'm happy to go next. So my name is Cliff Berg, and my Agile journey began about 20 years ago. I was CTO of a company that I co-founded, about 200 people. And one of our best architects, Jeff Nielsen, said to his project manager that there was this really interesting new book called Extreme Programming Explained, and we should try that. And we did. And he led the effort, and it worked out really well. And that was really the beginning of my own Agile journey. I've lost track of the number of organizations with Agile and DevOps. I'm very involved in the DevOps community. I do DevOps training. So I'm mainly on the kind of product delivery side rather than product envisioning side. And also recently with Lisa Cooney and 13 other people, I was involved with an effort to come up with something we call Agile2, which is basically the ideas and thinking that we find recur again and again within the Agile community among people who find success with Agile. We try to establish and add those ideas to the standard narrative. They're not new ideas, they're well-established ideas, but we put it in a container. It's intended to be open, and that's, I think, a big topic of the talk today. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Glenn.
Thanks. And I'm Ahmed Sidki. I'm the president of ICAgile, also the co-founder of the Business Agility Institute and the head of business agility at Riot Games. I'm a business agility practitioner. I love to live this. I love to be in the trenches, and hopefully bring you guys some stories today. So,
Excellent. Thanks, Ahmed. And so I wanted to kind of start us with, we're in this 20th anniversary of the Agile Manifesto and the really the revolution that brought into the software development industry. And I wanted to start us with, what are the key things that we've learned in these last 20 years?
Lisa, what do you think?
Well, seeing as I haven't been around for the entire 20 years, it's interesting. I hear people use the term waterfall a lot to describe how things were done back in the 90s. I started out my career in the 80s, and although I wasn't in the software development, I was creating what we used to call computer-based training, or CBT. And I worked with engineers every day, very, very closely. And we had to communicate constantly because they were writing custom software to create this fancy new training with video and audio. And it was all very exciting and new and cutting edge at the time. And it was very iterative, very collaborative. We met every day, we talked, we shared ideas. It was very collegial. Later, when I moved down to DC in 2010 and started working again and getting into the work world, I was kind of surprised by the way that things had become kind of rigid and step by step. Even in my field in instructional design, there was a version of waterfall called ADDIE, which is a model for instructional design. It's basically waterfall. And so when I hear stories from folks who are software engineers who practiced in the 80s and 90s, who essentially were doing Agile before Agile was a thing, it resonates with me because I have a few experiences that I can relate to that. And so when I got into the Agile space, I just really fell in love with the philosophy. Right. I majored in moral philosophy in college, in philosophy, and wrote a thesis on moral philosophy. And I just really was drawn to this concept of values and principles. Like, these are the ideals we hold dear and that we strive towards. And we hold them close, even as we fail in our efforts to achieve their promise. And that's really what pulled me in and holds me in the Agile space.
I can go next. Oh, go ahead, Cliff, if you're ready, go.
Oh, no, I want to hear your response.
So I was going to say, for me, there's a lot that the past 20 years has sort of shown light on, but I'll focus on three things, what we've learned for the past 20 years. One, I think there's an appetite for this. I think the people that wrote the manifesto didn't know what would happen with it. But I think the past 20 years really showed that, Lisa, to your point, that rigidness, there's an appetite for the opposite, right? There's an appetite for flexibility, for adaptiveness, for agility. And appetites vary. Some companies and some people are very hungry for it. Some people are like, I'm going to taste it and see how it is. But there's an appetite for this. And that's something by itself really encouraging. About humanity and the state of business. So that's one. Number two, I think what we learned also in the past 20 years is this is not a button that you will press and become agile. This is a journey, and a long journey, and a journey that, as much as you want to find shortcuts around it and try to accelerate it, it is a journey best experienced at its own pace, right? There are things that you can do to enhance it and so forth, but it takes time. And that brings me to my third point, to stay concise. I think also what we learned in the past 20 years is that it's a deeply human journey. And the human aspect of business, and for me at least, it all boils down to humans, right? Influencing their mindsets, taking them on learning journeys, seeing what's wrong, why are they resisting? The whole field of coaching came into play with this. Like, we acknowledging that it is it's not about cogs and systems and things, but it's about people and feelings and mindsets and concepts and beliefs and values, and understanding the humanity of this journey is something that I think more and more people over the past 20 years have realized, acknowledged, and are starting to work on, from leaders in companies to transformational coaches and whatnot.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, it's really important, about it being a journey. I mean, you know, the 90s kind of changed things. You know, I mean, the journey really is kind of back to how things worked before, really, because, you know, I like to call the 90s the methodology craze.
Yeah.
During the 90s, all of a sudden, all these frameworks and methodologies started popping. You know, before that, people didn't do it that way. You know, when the manifesto came out, I was 20 years into my career. And I had been on lots of projects that were extremely agile, extremely. You know, we ran full integration tests every night and had reports the next day of all the tests. We developed against a backlog. We had extremely good, effective servant leadership, immense collaboration. Even though we were in private offices, we were constantly bumping in and out of each other's offices. We would run into the project lead's office and use his whiteboard and have Socratic discussions. You know, how should we do this? How should this work? And talk it through. It's extremely agile. And that was the 80s. And then the 90s came along. And suddenly you saw, you know, these prescriptive methodologies where you had to create all these documents. And, you know, software engineers back then didn't want to do that. It was like, what? You know, it was these methodologies and procurement officers and so on that were like saying, well, this is how you should do it. You know, this is the new standard, or you have to use a methodology, which was RUP, was like a great method. So many documents. Why do we have to create 10 different kinds of architecture document when really it's people just need to know what are the key strategies, the key technical strategies that are going to make this thing work. That's what they want to know. They don't want a 300-page document with every little detail figured out. They know that doesn't make sense. So it might make sense for building a bridge, something we've done for thousands of years. But if you're building something entirely new, you can't do it that way. And developers knew you can't do it that way. You know, so I think, you know, the Agile Manifesto was a reaction to that. And we're really kind of getting back to using common sense and using individual judgment. But we are informed by some new experiences. Some things have changed and we have learned a lot. I think the Agile community has grown up. You know, and 10 years ago, you often heard, don't do Agile, be Agile. But a lot of people in the Agile community saying that didn't really know what that meant, didn't really know, well, how do you be Agile? Today they do, you know, and, you know, so I think that's changed. And I think that one thing people have learned about it is it's not simple. The manifesto was a very inspiring thing. It's got wisdom in it, but it's not enough to actually help someone be Agile, not by a long shot. It's like just a set of ideas that maybe start you on the path of thinking that way. But, you know, in order to actually implement those ideas, you need much, much more, you know, and, you know, so Agile2 tries to dabble in that. What is some of the more, you know, and it's not complete. You cannot write something complete on this. This is about human behavior. And I think, you know, one of the things also the community has realized, another thing that's changed in 20 years is, you know, because the manifesto and the Agile movement was kind of a reaction and a rejection of, you know, the methodology craze of the 90s, which is the encroachment of theory X management into IT and how software teams build stuff. You know, before that, software teams were like black magic, and theory X management didn't touch it. It didn't understand it. But then it found its way into it. And, you know, so Agile Manifesto is kind of rejection of that, but it didn't really tell you like what to do in place, you know.
Well, so Cliff,
Yeah.
speaking of what to do in place, you know, you all talk in Agile2 about the importance of leadership, and we recognize that as one of those key areas that needs to sort of shift their thinking. And so how do you see leadership shifting? And I guess I'll open that back up to everybody. Is how do you see leadership shifting as more organizations embrace business agility and moving these values, principles, practices beyond software development?
Yeah. Well, leadership needs to, you know, and, you know, none of this is new. I mean, Socratic leadership, I think, is one of the pillars of this, and it goes back to Socrates. So none of this is new, but we need to remind ourselves, of these patterns and these approaches, and so like being inquisitive, instead of like a manager thinking of themselves as a boss, think of yourself as like someone who's trying to make sure that a team or a group of teams or a group of teams is able to reach the goal. Look at it as a system, step out from it. And what does that take? So first you have to make sure, as a leader, you have to make sure you understand, and you have to ask, do they understand? And you have to think, how can I get them to understand what's going on so they can solve it? It's about driving the conversation, and it's about making sure there are leaders within the groups who can continue to drive the conversation and reach good decisions. So it's not about telling people what to do. Sometimes you might have to make a decision. Someone has to make a decision when there are resources involved and dollars involved. Someone's got to decide. Someone has to decide, what team should we create? So there are decisions that have to be made. And sometimes if a team is doing something that's wrong, yeah, you might let them fail, or you might not. What if people will die if they fail? Well, then you can't let them fail. So you have to judge the context and then realize, is this something I should make an autocratic decision about, or help them think it through, and then maybe let them decide, what's the situation? But it's not about being a boss. It's about more being an organizer, being someone who can drive the discussion, make sure the discussions are happening. And it needs to be more on demand, because a lot of the issues today are cross-cutting. It's not about, the organization boxes, where I control this and you control that. It doesn't work like that today. A lot of issues, like say you have a digital platform that has lots of microservices. Those microservices might be used by lots of different products. So if some issue comes up related to the microservice, you now have different product areas, maybe crossing lines of business, that have to deal with the issue. So you need a just-in-time decision-making process. You need leadership. There needs to be leadership put on that problem. And that leadership might then need to go away when the problem is solved. So someone's got to be like watching that, cooking that soup, and making sure that the right leadership is actually in place and working in an inquisitive and Socratic manner and getting decisions made in a real-time sense.
Great.
Let me add to that leadership question. So I think I empathize with this. I think leadership, the what Agile has done to how businesses run right now has made leadership easier and harder. Very honestly, like just being someone in the trenches as a leader. There are things that are easier, and let me start with that. The easier things is, it's more okay now to say, okay, sorry, Siri. It's more okay now to say, I don't know. That behavior 30, 40 years ago from a leader would be like, again, some leaders and some cultures understood that, but I'm talking about the majority here, right? So I think it's easier for leaders to say, I don't know, I don't have all the answers, you guys figure that out. So that that fictitious false belief that as a leader, I have to have all the answers, I have to have the best answer, like that, for many people, it's not ubiquitous yet, but for people who understand this type of modern leadership approach, sort of that makes it easier. That actually lightens the burden. What makes it harder is you have to inspire and influence and engage. And I'll be honest, that's not easy. Like, it sounds easy in a book and it makes total sense, and if you're on the receiving side, but when you're a leader, again, you have these pressures. It's a very stressful position because people look up to you, people depend on you, people depend on your decisions. And how to engage and influence in a empowering, engaging manner starts to take a toll on you if you're not truly understanding the why, and you're not taking care of yourself and all those things. So I think leadership is on a phenomenal journey to transform, and just something to consider. It's that we're very critical of leadership always, like at all levels. Everyone looks up and say, but empathize a little bit because it's hard. It really, really is hard. So just wanted to add that.
So what are your thoughts?
Well, there are so many models for leadership and so many styles and methods and approaches. Whole academic departments and universities dedicated to the topic. And I think what I've concluded, and many others have as well, is that there's no one perfect way or style or approach that will work in all situations. And really the challenge for the leaders that I've gotten to know and worked closely with is being aware of all of these different styles, approaches, models, techniques, and analysis, et cetera, and being able to have enough context and awareness of the current situation you're in right now, the context, how people feel, what's going on, and choosing an approach and a method that will work right now with this group, with this problem, with this situation. Mm-hmm. So for example, in some scenarios, we talk a lot about self-organized teams and, being light on authoritarian leadership and with agile teams. That may be a really good approach, especially if you're dealing with a team of senior engineers who've been together for a long time and really know what they're doing and have really good skills. Not just technical skills, but also, they're self-aware and they communicate well with one another and so forth. If you're dealing with a group of junior engineers who are right out of college, who've never done Agile before, they've learned a lot of computer science, but they've never really heard that much about Scrum, or maybe they read something about it in one class. And then you take those folks together and you basically say, okay, everybody, I want you to use Scrum and just figure it out, and you're self-organized and I want you to be autonomous. And that is a recipe for real problems, right? So the type of leadership and the style of leadership in each situation, if you're a positional leader who has authority and power, you have to be able to adjust and adapt based on the unique circumstances. And you need to be aware that leadership takes many, many forms. So let's talk about that little group of kids from college. One of them's going to stand up and say, I know what we'll do. I have all kinds of great ideas. And everybody else is like, oh, thank God we have somebody who can tell us what to do, because we're not sure. And though, the leader's happy, they're doing their thing, the followers are happy, they're following. But is this group of people doing what the owners of the company need or want them to be doing? Are they going in the right direction? Do they have the kind of guidance? Do the leaders themselves have other leaders who are mentors for them in leadership? Not just in the technical work they're tackling, but in the human side of leadership. Does, who's a manager versus who's a leader, right? Who has positional power versus who is a leader because everybody just really respects their knowledge and expertise, or really loves their personality and values their opinion. There's high trust. So we have all kinds of leaders, and we need to seek them out and promote, as leaders ourselves, we need to seek and promote that sort of concept of everywhere leadership. And we also need to respect positional authority and power. So I've seen, for example, leaders who will throw out an idea as just a suggestion, and everyone else will take it as a mandate, just because the leader themselves didn't have full awareness of just how strong their positional power was in the organization. Yeah. So I think it's a very complex topic. There's no easy answers to these things. Yeah.
So I want to tug the thread a little bit, because Ahmed's a couple of times you've referenced the journey, right? You talked about the transformation journey, you talked about the journey of leadership. What's the journey that Agile is on? Where are we going next?
Okay.
So,
Oh, no, you go.
are you sure?
Yes, no, you go. I want to hear what you say.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, I don't have the answer. I mean, but my opinion, I think the journey that quote unquote Agile is going on is, I think it was sort of the original intent from the beginning, but it was more in a certain scope, and it's being broadened the scope of, right? So I think initially this idea of flexibility and adaptiveness and all that was really focused on sort of the domain of software development. I think really we're taking this to, again, some people call it business agility, some people call it, Agile2, but it's the holistic view of how a business runs using the same mindset, values, principles, right? Manifesting very differently from, HR and finance to marketing to product development to whatnot, but it's making businesses more flexible for a variety of different reasons. One is just the level of disruption we're all living in, and just, COVID just amped that up, but, a couple of notches for everyone. I think a lot more companies are starting to shift and understand this idea of customer centricity. And it's not really about me as a company, but it really is about my customer, and I need to win with my customer. And if I don't do it, there's 5 people in a garage starting something that are going to disrupt me, and no one's safe from disruption these days. And so I think this idea of I need to be more flexible, nimble, agile as a business holistically, right? So that I can win with my customer, so that I can serve my customer. So I think that the journey that Agile is going on is to create or take shape. And what does that really look like inside of all the different aspects of a business, right? Not just from sort of product, delivery, but to operations, to leadership, as we were just talking about, to finance and legal and sales. And like some of these we've dabbled in as a community already. Some of them we haven't even touched yet. And when you put them all together, it's still going to be something we haven't touched. So I think that's part of the journey, at least from my perspective.
Interesting. Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Well, this is hard. And I think people want an easy answer. They want step-by-step guidance and assurance that if I just follow this framework or follow this model and I do all the things right and I follow the rules, it's all going to work and I'm going to be successful. And
I'll be safe,
What's that?
No.
Yeah, well,
I'm just kidding. Oh, come on. Well,
I think I feel for company. I started out my career after graduate school at Kodak, which at the time had 160,000 employees around the world, and was crawling with engineers and scientists and tech people doing all manner of things. I mean, they invented digital photography and then didn't realize what they had, and unfortunately sold the patent. And I feel for companies that are really large like that decide they really want to do things differently and go in an agile direction. And they can't necessarily just start with a team of 10 people, because they might have 800 engineers on a huge variety of teams. And so, well, what are they going to do? And so they look around and they try to find, well, how do we start? What do we do? And you need to start somewhere. Right. And, there are so many different frameworks. I personally, I love that quote, all models are wrong, some models are useful, I know, the Scrum Guide says if you don't do things exactly this way, then you're not doing Scrum, you're doing something else, or you're doing it wrong. The implication is you're doing it wrong. But my personal choice as a coach is to take a more cafeteria approach and to say, I need to learn deeply about the context. Like right now I'm working for a media company, and it's, a very different context. And so I need to understand and be aware of that context before I can tell them what's going to work. And so I rotate between teams. And when I get with a new team, they'll tell me, okay, what do we need, on day one? What do we need to change? What are the best practices? What did you do with that other team? And we want to do it here. Like, well, you're a different kind of team with a different kind of product doing a different kind of thing. Let's get to know each other a little bit. Let's talk about what's happening. Let's get some context. And I really resist, just giving them a list of best practices. Here's all the things to implement, because what worked for that other team might not work in this team, right? And that's sort of true on a micro scale, but it's fractal, right? It's also true on a huge macro scale. And here in DC, a lot of folks work for and support the federal government. And the federal government is grappling with how to implement Agile. And they butt up against things like the annual budgeting process that sort of drives them away from Agile ways of doing contracting. But at the same time, they have to update all their IT infrastructure and put new systems in place and modernize. And how do they balance all of that? And you can't just say to people like that, well, it's hopeless, and walk away, right? Especially when they're standing there saying, please help me, what do we do? So you roll up your sleeves, you start asking questions, and you do your best to support them. And I don't think we always know in advance what's going to be the right answer or the best way. But
so really interesting there, Lisa, because it tied into a question that we've got from the audience here about, one of the problems in organizations is who tells who what to do. Right. And so we've got sort of this almost a hierarchy developing in there, that there's, you've got your Scrum Master, your Senior Scrum Master, your coach, your Senior Coach, your Enterprise Coach, and it starts building in that hierarchical thinking coming into play. Where do you see this out in your organizations, this starting to happen?
Yeah, I think it comes back to, like, we hear a lot about holacracy, and I've read books on it and heard talks on it and find it completely fascinating. And I've also talked to people who worked at Zappos and have worked at other places and have said it doesn't work and I don't like it, and here's all the reasons why. It's like anything, right? There's the good, the bad, the things that are helpful, the things that are useful, and then things that don't fly. If you put a group of people together and say, figure it out, they might become like Lord of the Flies, and just start doing crazy stuff. But, or they might start doing really great things. And so how do you support leadership as it emerges in those environments? So I think the challenge is that you really have a fundamental, like I started out as an instructional designer trying to teach Agile. You deal with a group of people who've never heard it and don't know Scrum and Kanban, and those words sound very strange to them. And they need some guidance. Like, they're like, where do we start? What do we do? And you can't answer that question by saying, well, there's 80 frameworks and every framework has a long list of pros and cons, and you could do this or you could do this, but it depends on that. I mean, because a person who's never done this before, who's just starting out, is going to just be deer in the headlights and say, well, you're no help. I'm going to go find somebody who can tell me what to do, damn it. It's easy. Oh, sorry. I'll use this word. I apologize. So, we need to be able to support people who just need some guidance at the beginning. And we need to take care not to assume that that means this is how things should always be done for all time, that this is fixed. And that, I've been in that situation where I've been with a brand new team and say, well, let's start with this. And then it gets entrenched. And then when I realize things need to shift and I start to talk to them about shifting, they'll say, well, that's not how you told us to do it. We can't change it. We don't want to change it, because people love to stick with what they're doing. It's human nature. I'm the same way. I like things to stay the same too, just like, because I'm human.
I used to tell teams that I coach, if I come back and because I used to do a bunch of, if I come back and you're doing what you've been doing with me, then you haven't been agile, right? Then you haven't been adapting over time. One thing, I just to add to the answer about the Scrum Master, Senior Scrum Master, the hierarchy, I don't know if everyone's going to agree with my point of view here, but when organizations get bigger, you do need structure. And I think I think we as an Agile community sometimes go to extremes, like just be honest about it. And we go theoretical sometimes. But, you know, living in organizations that are growing and seeing it firsthand, yeah, like I need a structure. I need to put people in a structure. And then people say, but what about these orgs that have networks and don't have titles? And okay, to your point, Lisa, like those are great experiments. Go talk to people there and you'll find something interesting. There are hidden networks. There are hidden hierarchies. There are hidden structures. So my opinion is, please make them explicit. At least I know them, right? Because with implicit ones, there's actually, I think, more danger in lack of fairness, in lack of inclusion, like just there's a bunch of different problems that come with that. I think we're talking about I think that's one dimension of it. But what's really important is when you put these titles, whether explicitly or implicitly, right? What does it mean? It's the behaviors of people. If I have a Scrum Master and a Senior Scrum Master, I don't care about the titles. It really is, are people dealing with people like I know and I tell you, right? Or are they there in support of each other, right? Like it's boil it down to the behaviors that you want to see from these ranks, hierarchies, whatever, right? And let's have that discussion, because I think I think when you just have more than 100 or 160 people, right, in an org, you just have to put structures. Now, are those structures going to dictate behaviors, or do I have a culture that's stronger and a mindset and values and principles that dictate behavior? I think that's where we really need to focus. So just my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. And what's interesting is if you look at management theory writing from like 100 years ago, hierarchies were proposed as a solution to the unfairness of informal networks. It was, people who were writing about, what was, eventually became known as, management theory, proposed hierarchies as a solution to the problem, but of course, every solution has its own problem. And like you said, it really is the behavior of people. It's not, an organization is not about the boxes. It's about the individuals and how they behave in whatever boxes they're in. If you don't have the behaviors right, nothing works. And about pivoting on something that Lisa was talking about, to go back a little bit, in terms of like the teams and teams or teams of teams, whatever level, it doesn't matter. That people want, sometimes they want to know what to do, and sometimes they don't. Depends if the issue is important to them. If it's not important to them, they would rather someone say, we're going to do this and this. But if it matters to them, then they want to have a say. Or if it's done in a certain way and they don't like the outcome, then they want to have a say. But, like junior teams, there's a cultural element in the Agile community that, to be a coach or a facilitator, you should never give your own opinion. You have to like put a different hat on if you're going to do that. And I don't agree with that. I think it depends on how you do it, because you can say, and this is Socratic leadership. You can say, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And if, you can convey that you're open to criticism, because, if someone says, well, what about this? You can say, good point. How would you solve that? And so you can get the discussion going so that your idea that you propose as the facilitator isn't the one that wins, but the group leads it somewhere. And then that's the idea that wins. A lot of times with new teams, I do a lot of DevOps, coaching. And one thing that I do, a lot of times teams don't know a lot of DevOps practices. And so I have to teach them in a sense, but I don't tell them what to do. What I do is I say, well, how do we want to make sure our stuff is tested? And people say, well, we should do this kind of test and that kind. And I'll say, well, what do you mean by that? What you just labeled a test is really an environment type. What kind of test, what kind of test do we need and why? And then they'll clarify it. And then they'll come up with, we want to do this and this. I'll say, well, is that what we want to do? Because then we'll have the following problem. We'll have too long a cycle time if we do it that way. And they say, oh, well, how do we fix that? And I might throw out an idea, and then the conversation will go somewhere. In the end, they decide how to do it, but teaching occurred, ideas were provided, but they decided in the end, even though they're a junior team, they still decided, but they were, they got the kind of guidance that they needed to make a good decision. So I don't think it's either or. You can have a junior team that doesn't know what it doesn't know, and you can provide some instruction, but then still leave them empowered so they can make the final decision, unless they want to drive off a cliff,
And that's where we want to make sure we stop them, is when they're starting to head towards that cliff. I want to shift gears just a smidge in our conversation, because we did have another really good question come in about saying the problem with Agile is in the name itself, because to a lot of people that just means faster, right? Do you see Agile2 or even this whole Agile space, does it need a rebranding? Maybe to, as Ahmed said a few times, adaptive, flexible, something else?
Well, we picked the Agile2 name very carefully. There was a lot of discussion about that among the 15 participants. And we picked the name so that it would be very clear that we were talking about, because the ideas in Agile2 are not really from outside the Agile community. They're things that, people who do Agile well, they know this stuff. It's what they think and what they do, and generally. And, so the problem has been, there are a lot of people in the Agile community who know how to make change happen and know how to have an Agile setting, Agile organization. But there's also a lot of writing that, as Ahmed said, is very, what was the word you used, Ahmed? I forget the word you used, but some of it is like too simple or too extreme. And, people who have a lot of experience know better. They know that the Agile Manifesto says this, but it really means to be thoughtful about that. Don't do that exactly. Best form of communication is face-to-face. Well, it depends. Does that mean you should never write anything down, never read and write? I'm sure that, I hope that wasn't the intention, because there's a time and place for different forms of communication. And someone who is experienced and thoughtful about this knows that. But there's a lot of kind of simple-minded, dogmatic writing, and we wanted to add to the Agile narrative things that the smart people in the community know, and say, hey, look, this is important Agile stuff. This is not something else. This is Agile stuff. What do you think? We're open to pushback, but we want it to be clear. It's part of directed at Agile.
I think that Christina is an evolution. Like Agile is evolving, and there's different names and there's an infinite universe of them. I don't really know the origin of the term Lean Six Sigma, but somebody thought of it as a good term and it stuck. And we did talk about, calling this something else entirely. And then several of us said, fundamentally, we really love Agile and we really believe in a lot of the concepts and ideas and philosophies behind this. Some of us are very involved in the business agility community, love what's going on there. we're involved in Agile outside of IT. Some of us are really deep in, DevOps or data science or whatever, right? But fundamentally, what the thing that we all had in common was this attachment to and really deep appreciation for Agile with all of its varied meanings. And we didn't want to imply that we've created something brand new. Really, I think what Cliff, you said it well, is, we're articulating ideas that have been out there for a while. They're drawn from lots of different places. This isn't a framework, it's not a methodology. It's an articulation of concepts that I've been hearing batting around for a long time, and that people who've been doing this for a long time, kind of say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I can see where you're going with that. We also don't think of it as final, like the be all end all forever static. This is the thing. And, it'll evolve too. And I don't know what it's going to evolve into, but it will probably be great. And, I hope that the best ideas and the core ideas will survive on into whatever comes next.
So I think that kind of blew up our questions when I was when we started talking there. Started getting lots of this about looking at how, if we look at this evolution of Agile as a term, and some folks, seeing it as meaning faster, and it came in as one of the questions, is actually comes from a Latin about to get stuff done, basically to do. If we rebrand or continue this evolution, don't we just risk having the same problem with whatever we call the next thing?
Yeah, we do risk that, in my opinion. And I think there's a risk to everything in life, right? And I still feel it's important to articulate things and put ideas out there and encourage and invite smart, knowledgeable people to debate them, disagree with them, come up with something better, evolve in their thinking. But yeah, I would agree that that's a risk, and it's a never-ending journey. It gets back to what Ahmed said about we're all on a learning journey. And I don't know that none of us really know the destination. I mean, 2 years ago, when I went to, a little less than 2 years ago, Agile 2019 here in DC, and was surrounded by this wonderful community, I couldn't have dreamed what we were in for with the pandemic and how everything was going to change and our lives would be turned upside down for all of us, and the tragedy and the confusion. And it's sort of a paradigm for what life is really like for all of us in a way. And so if we want things to be clear and stable as humans, I know me personally as a human, that's what I want. Well, just like I want to, have food and shelter and all the things that a human person needs and wants in their life. But I might not get the things that I want. And the risk is inherent in stepping out there. And so what I hope folks will decide and choose to join in the conversation, to push back, to debate, to say, I don't agree with something. What did you mean by this? To, join in the conversation and promote their own ideas about what do they think the future of Agile is? Where are we going with this? What does it mean? I mean, that's why I'm so devoted to the business agility community and to supporting the conference every year, because the depth of the conversations and the way that the community is tackling really hard topics is really profound and very exciting to be a part of. And I don't go to those events or expect them to have the answers or to tell me what to do, right? I go to them because of this incredible energy that I feel, this opening up, this intellectual expansion of possibility.
Just to add to your question, Christina, and to answer Lisa, I think when we get to terms, Agile, what does it mean and all that, I invite you to sort of look beyond what's really happening on the surface here, right? Those who are pushing back and saying, well, Agile means faster, or leaders who misinterpret Agile to be this or that. I think go down that, be curious in that, and find out why that's actually happening, because Agile means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And some people understand it the way they want to. For some people, it's just an excuse to do whatever the hell they want. Like, it's just, terms are very flimsy and people can associate whatever they want with them. As I think leaders and change agents and people just passionate about what we do, I invite you, especially, and I saw one of the questions about leadership and that being one of the challenges in rolling out Agile. Get curious, because I think that the challenge with leadership is, it's easy to point up and say, leaders are the problem. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. But we actually, those who know, don't educate up, don't find those opportunities to influence up. And by the way, influencing up is just as important as influencing down, right? And sideways. And so, and I can empathize with leaders, because again, it's a very stressful environment. If I don't have those opportunities to think, to explore, to expand, and I'm just in firefighting mode, and everyone is just telling me, okay, I'll, whatever. But if you have some insight and you find those opportunities to poke at, at that thought process for your leader or whoever, and say, hey, what about if we do it this way? What about this? Would you be open to this experiment? And just, I think we point blame there, but we don't actually help, right? And I think there's a lot that we can do to help leadership. And I think that's why it's been one of the major problems in Agile transformations. One is, they don't receive a lot of compassionate help. We do that with our teams and our peers, but we don't do it up a lot, right? And so I think the problem with leadership is very solvable. I've seen it when you take the time and you have the courage and you talk to leaders about, this is the impact of what you're doing, right? Is this the outcome that you want? What behaviors do you want to see in the org? Well, what you're doing is actually not leading to those behaviors. It's leading to the opposite. All of those discussions start to open, because at the end, by the way, they're humans, right? Starts to open people's minds, like, okay, what can I do different, right? But leadership is sometimes a very lonely place too, by the way. So just things to consider. I don't think it's an endemic problem. I think it's something we can solve. But it takes a compassionate view versus what the hell's wrong with you, leaders?
Exactly. So that's going to bring us right to the end of our time here. So I want to say, obviously, a great big thank you to Cliff, Lisa, and Ahmed for joining us today and engaging in this discussion.
Christina, one quick thing.
Oh, yeah.
Can you pronounce Agile in a Canadian way? I saw that
it's
was
Agile.
Agile.
Yeah, it totally is.
That's the rebranding.
We say Agile here north of the US border. If you'd like to continue exploring the learning journeys available to you, or engage in this conversation some more about what is this next step in Agile, come on and visit us at ICAgile.com or at Agile2.net. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
ICAgile.